Okay, so welcome in the audience, the people that are watching this, and welcome all of our I Heart Regina panelists. We've gathered here today in this virtual space together to talk about this precious piece that was created 10 years ago exactly. And before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the Saskatchewan Film Pool Cooperative resides on Treaty 4 territory, situated on territories of the Nihiluk, Anishinaabeg, Cree, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis Michif Nation. I Heart Regina, also known as 13 Stories from the Center of the Universe, was a passion project of first Mark Wihak and Vanda Schmokel, and then turned into a unique collaborative project of 14 filmmakers, which we have 7 here today. Tells 13 narrative stories from Regina. It was filmed in the various different neighborhoods in Regina. And what makes this anthology film special is that now 10 years later, it can be seen as a kind of a landmark of its time and the film industry that was still thriving at the day 10 years ago. And before we move into talking with more depth about everything that went on with this film and the experiences that followed, I would like to hear from all of you. So let's do a round of introductions. You could mention first who you are, which film did you make for this, this film, and kind of what your current relationship is with moving image today. And we could maybe do a alphabetical first name order. So we'll start with you, Diane.
Hello, everyone. I'm Diane Olette. I've been living in Saskatchewan since I was 5 years old. My film is Catherine, which is part of the I Heart Regina project. And I'm currently still making films, independent short films. And I've, over the last 10 years, I guess I've made quite a few short films and one feature. And I work at the university as a communications specialist.
Great.
We are in fast forward from the day we are born until the day we die. But every so often, there are moments in a lifetime where everything slows down. And the beauty that is in front of you catches your eye, or maybe even your breath. For dear Catherine, it seems as though her ending may be near. But for every ending, there is a beginning, so take a deep breath and prepare, because there is no happily ever after here.
Let's move on to Jackie.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jackie Zuba. I did the -47 film in the I Heart Regina. I left Saskatchewan in 2013. I'm living in Kelowna, BC right now. I'm still managing to hang on in the film industry somehow. But, you know, thankfully, well, the pandemic is catching up to my lifestyle in the first place. We're working remotely. So, yeah, I still have been doing some small stuff from Saskatchewan here and there from longtime colleagues, and then kind of trying to make my way into the industry here in BC and in Kelowna.
Great, thanks.
Continuing Blowing cold, temperatures hover around the -35-degree mark. Winds out of the northeast at 15 kilometers an hour. With the wind chill, it feels more like -47.
-47?
And Lowell, you're next in the alphabetical order.
Hi, Lowell Dean, writer and director of Remembrance Day, one of the shorts in I Heart Regina. And I like how Jackie put it with hanging on. That's how I feel I've been doing in the film industry. After I Heart, I did a few feature films, and lately I feel like there's like an interesting shift with film and television, and I've spent the last 2 years kind of devoted to trying to get more into television, actually. And also I've uprooted to Toronto after a long-standing battle with trying to stay in Saskatchewan. So that's where I'm at.
Okay.
To stay over on the holiday. Hank and I are thinking electric since it's less expensive. You know, maybe some realistic looking wood and a nice marble frame. Plus we don't have to worry about the fuse.
Great. And next is Mark.
Hi, I'm Mark Wehak. My I Heart film is called The Ant and the Elephant, and it stars two actors from Regina, Judy Wenzel and Kate Harriet. And we shot in one of my favorite places in the city, a parking lot of the Victoria Square Mall. And I'm still making films. I'm really lucky. I have a gig at the University of Regina at the Department of Film. And so I'm still able to make films, and I'm currently working on a serialized feature film called Resting Potential, which I hope to have out in the next 6 months or so. But the changes in Saskatchewan in the last 10 years have also affected even independent filmmakers, which I'm sure we'll talk about more in a bit.
Grilled peanut?
No, don't mind if I do.
Ready?
Yep.
Sure?
Lay it on me.
All right. Hang on tight. Here we go. So, there's this elephant.
Great. Then moving on to Mauricio.
I'm Mauricio Carvajal. I directed a foreign song with Carlos Londoño, who was a professor at the university, who was so kind to act in it. He's also Colombian. I'm originally from Colombia, but I lived in Regina for almost 14 years before I moved to Toronto. I've been here in Toronto since 2014. I am a partner in a company called the Film Lab. We do a lot of corporate work and short form documentary, commercials, and stuff like that. I still try to do shorts and get involved in the film industry a little bit here, but not as much as the pandemic and economics and everything. You have to pay bills, so we do a lot of commercial work, but we're still doing a lot of video related stuff, from animation to corporate messaging. So
Great, interesting. Thank you. Then Robin.
Right, I'm Robin Schlott. My segment was Don't Slip on the Ice. And I'm still in Regina. I'm here mostly for family reasons, I guess, or otherwise I might be gone. And I think most of my day is devoted to work outside the film business, but I am still dabbling in things, often as a producer, and working mostly in documentary when I do manage to work in media.
Great.
don't get me wrong. I think Saskatchewan's a great province.
It's definitely in the top 10.
Definitely. I have a tattoo in the shape of Saskatchewan on my arm. I just think it's important to get out every now and again, you know what I mean? Travel, see the world, at least Manitoba.
And then last but not least, Vanda.
Hi, I'm Vanda Schmuckel, and I've directed the short Except When I Don't, which featured Carly Steele and Heather Cameron, a writer and a local dancer and choreographer. Yeah, I was working in the film industry in Saskatchewan for a number of years. Prior to that, I worked in Toronto. I came from Toronto to Saskatchewan and worked in the industry for a number of years. I don't anymore, obviously. I'm still in Saskatchewan and turned my hand to some freelance writing and communications in recent years. And that's kind of where I'm at right now. I still dabble with the idea of making films, but I actually haven't been terribly active as a filmmaker in the last couple of years, just for different reasons.
Okay.
Hey, Carly. Come on in. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too.
You're back. You look great.
Thanks.
So, how long are you here for?
I don't know. A month?
Oh, that'd be good.
I don't know. Hope not longer than that.
Well, thank you. Very different backgrounds, experiences. So this is going to be interesting. Let's take it first back to the beginning. How this film started to form. This question is maybe a little bit for Mark and Vanda, who were the minds behind the project. So could you elaborate a little bit about what motivated you in the first place, and where did this idea for I Heart Regina come from?
Yeah, I guess the idea hatched between Vanda and I probably 10 or 15 minutes after we had seen this film called Paris Je t'aime, which had come out and was this anthology film with 14 or 18 directors making these short films all set in Paris. And we kind of walked out of the screening and one of us said, it'd be funny to make a film like that in Regina. And we laughed. And then we thought, actually, it's not that funny. It's maybe not a bad idea because Paris Je t'aime and the films that kind of followed it, New York, I Love You, Berlin, I Love You, Rio, I Love You, we're all kind of set in these kind of glamorous world cities. And, part of the appeal of watching the film was just seeing these beautiful cities and these glamorous people. And, we're aware the reality is most people on earth don't live in those glamorous world cities. We live in cities like Regina and Edmonton and all around the world. There are probably cities in Finland that are the equivalent of Regina. So we thought our lives are as important as anybody else's and as interesting. And we knew that there was more than enough filmmakers in Regina to get a project like this going. And I think, when we had that idea, we immediately reached out to some filmmakers. I think Robin and Jackie and Brett Bell and Brian Stockton were probably some of the first people we talked to about this idea. And everybody we talked to liked the idea and were willing to get on board. And probably from this initial group of 5 or 6 filmmakers, we put together a list. And I think we had 48 names on it of filmmakers that we knew in Regina who might want to be involved in this project. And it kind of went from there.
Well, this is a good time to throw the ball to the filmmakers involved. I'm curious to hear how you first kind of responded to a project like this. Was it out of your comfort zone at the time? What kind of reaction did you have? Whoever wants to go first can start.
Well, I'll go. I was a little bit floored to be invited into the group, to be honest, because my hat is usually in the editing suite, so I'm not usually a filmmaker per se. As a director, I guess I would qualify that. So I was floored and excited, and it was out of my comfort zone for sure. I I finally realized how much you have to think on your feet as a director. In the edit suite, you can take all your time to figure it all out and fix all the mistakes or whatever. But it was fun. It was exciting, and I don't remember it being 48 people, Mark. That's like, I don't know how we got it down to 13. Like, did that happen in that one meeting, or did that take 3 weeks to? Like, I don't remember that part.
Yeah, I was looking at the email trail, and we actually created a spreadsheet with all the names, and people started voting. So yeah, it wasn't an easy decision to try and get down to, I think we started with 16 because unfortunately there was a few filmmakers invited to the project that eventually had to withdraw because they had other obligations.
Right.
Like Zarka Nawaz and Corey Ginaru and Gabriel Kikut. Unfortunately, they had to withdraw. So we originally had this idea for 16 directors, and then it went down to 13 directors, and then we got Neil Sorensen on board to shoot some linking sequences.
Right.
So brought it up to 14, but.
Right, yeah. No, I remember sitting in your apartment one night in the Monroe Apartments, I think it was. You guys were living there, so I just have a memory of that.
Another thing that doesn't exist.
True.
What about, were some of you linked to the industry more at the time than this kind of more low budget independent filmmaking? And if so, how was that shift from working in the industry into this kind of way of working? I think maybe Lowell, were you a part of that part of filmmaking at that time, or?
Actually, not really. I was just honestly getting started in what I would consider like a career in film. So I was as surprised as anyone to be asked to take part in this, but very obviously flattered and excited. And I'd say prior to that, I had been doing a bunch of short films with a budget of whatever props I had in my house. So I don't remember exactly what the budget was, but it was modest, but it was far greater than anything I had to date in, I think, 2009, maybe, was it when we shot it, or 2010? But I was, like, I would say on the fringes of the industry. Like, I was trying to break into the film industry of Saskatchewan. So I was getting like director observer jobs or prep editing, anything I could do basically to get in. So this was a fun first invitation into making something.
I would say, sorry to jump in, I was in the industry, I think, pretty full on at the time of this. But was it, well, it was, so how is the question, how is it different? What was the question?
I guess I'm curious to hear, I've kind of understood, me myself, I wasn't living in Saskatchewan at the time or anyhow involved. So I'm curious to hear about this divide that I've understood was there at the time between industry and more kind of low budget filmmaking. So I'm just curious to hear about that experience of being involved with both.
Yeah, well, I feel really lucky that I kind of straddled both worlds sort of my whole career because of, I think, going to the U of R film school, where a lot of us kind of grew up together in the business and got to know each other. So I've always had like one hand in independent filmmaking in a lot of ways, and the other hand in the industry. Of course, you know, for some of us, you know, the industry was appealing because it meant, you know, bigger projects, more money, you know, stuff like that. But I do agree that there was sort of a divide, and I think it's probably impossible to not have that in a way, because they're very different things, and the approaches are so different, and the meaning is, one has a lot more meaning than the other sometimes. And but I do, as I say, I feel grateful to have colleagues like all of you that I could keep working with outside of the industry, because it's a whole different experience and a much deeper one. I don't get quoted in some job interview saying that.
We'll hope for that. We'll talk about the industry and kind of the shift in it a little bit later, but I would still want to dive into these films, these great films that you created, a little bit deeper before we do that. I watched the film after being here for 1 year the first time, so that would have been 2016, and now I watched it again, and this time I kind of understood more in a more deep way how the city has been archived through this film, and there's these certain elements that exist in the film that are not there anymore, and this commentary about the city itself. I'm curious to hear how you see this act of archiving through your work, and how do you feel now, 10 years later, after completing these films, watching them again and seeing these landscapes. And so there's one film, Robin's film, is very, there's a central element of the intercity bus service that was in place at the time and isn't anymore. So that's another element that has been archived through this work. So maybe you can start by talking a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. As a documentary filmmaker, archiving is important. And I sort of feel that with in fiction filmmaking, you're actually looking for something longer lasting and eternal, and so it's almost incidental, I think, the archiving of it. Obviously, I didn't know that the bus service would be canceled 5 years later. So, but within my film, there are, it's about a couple, some people coming to Regina on the bus, which is ironic in its own way. But you get glimpses out of the window of the landscape around Regina, and then of the streets looking out the window and some passing buildings. And that's about it as far as the archiving, in a sense, of the cities itself. But that hopefully the experiences that are explored in the film are somehow more eternal and people can relate to personally, even if they don't know Regina. So that was sort of my approach to that.
Did anyone else have feelings after watching their work a little bit later and realizing new things?
I have. So when I rewatched my film actually yesterday, because I haven't actually watched it probably in 9 or 10 years since it came out. And it's funny because when I look at it now, I think I was really focusing on the beauty of snow in Saskatchewan. And the film is quite dark, but beautiful and cold. Like you just get that sense that it's cold. And I think that's something about Saskatchewan that a lot of people, who have lived here realize, that it can be extremely beautiful, but yet very cold. And I think that's something that I took from what I rewatched yesterday.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. That kind of connects your and Jackie's work. That is even the title of the film, -47. That's kind of archiving the same element, but even that is changing a little bit. At least during these winters I've been here, it hasn't been that cold, so maybe that is changing too.
I just wanted to say,
yeah.
I watched the whole thing last night for the first time since I think we screened it at the museum years ago, and so it didn't have the credits in between. It was a whole different experience, and I was quite pleasantly surprised how well it holds up. It just going from one to the next was really, really enjoyable, I thought.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but Diane, the coldness of your film, it was chilly there. It was good. But mine, I chose the winter angle too, because there was so much of winter in Saskatchewan. But there was I never hated winter. You just kind of have to get out in it. So that's where I took my film.
And Vanda, in your film, there's even this commentary about the changes that happened in the city But then you also archived the Plains Hotel that is now gone. How much did you think about that kind of process of archiving and like process of things vanishing while you were creating that film?
Well, certainly we knew that the planes was going to come down, and that was sort of sad news because it was such an anchor. People had different feelings about the Plains Hotel, but it certainly served a function for a long time. And so it was something that I knew I wanted to document that as they were driving past the intersection, and that they would remark on it. And then the other things that were pointed out by Carly in her drive around, she goes, "Oh, the Oddfellows is gone. This is gone, huh? Oh, hey, Mountains is gone." And Heather says, "Yeah, where you been?" And it's that idea that, you know, if you leave any city for any period of time, things are going to change. They just do. And so it was conscious to a point, but it was also just kind of incidental as well. I mean, some specific things that have changed, I guess, since. Yeah, so it's, and then no one could have predicted that the empty lot that replaced the Plains Hotel would have remained an empty lot for quite so long, and would then turn into an empty hole, and then was filled back into an empty lot. So it's just this, yeah, it's a funny little allegory about Regina, I guess, maybe. But yeah, so.
And then on top of the things that are gone, there are obviously elements that are very precious for the city. And I feel, Lowell and Mauricio, in your films, you chose a location that is important to the city and still exists. What made you want to film at the University of Regina, and then at the Victoria Park, right? That's Victoria Park. Yes. We'll go with Mauricio first.
Well, I shot at the First Nations University, you know, part of the campus of the University of Regina, because it was accessible for me, but also because I guess now, if I see in retrospect, is the fact that the university embraced me with open arms when I was there, right? The First Nations University did, the University of Regina as well. And my story is about foreign people coming in and, you know, trying to struggle and trying to keep that idea of nostalgia of your homeland, of your motherland, and try to struggle that with the idea of what it is to move to a new city, to a new place, to try to find a completely different job because you're trying to do something for your family, right? So it does remind me a little bit of every single story of every single immigrant, that we all kind of have that similarity too, right? And now when I'm not in Regina, when I'm not in Saskatchewan, there is still some level of nostalgia for me, because the Plains, I still have a lot of love and respect for the Plains, because for the prairies, because they open their arms and they become my home for so long, and I do nothing but actually defend them here in Toronto to teach people, like, hey, come and see it, because it's actually a very special place.
Lowell, you wanna
Sure, yeah.
hear on that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think like I've always had like a love-hate relationship with Saskatchewan and Regina, and I don't know where that comes from. I was just trying to think about that while Mauricio was commenting on the love of it. I think it might be the desire, like the really intense desire to do something like film, but in a place where it's maybe something that doesn't grow as naturally, you know, when you plant it in the ground. So I think for me, I knew I wanted to do something because of that feeling. I wanted to do something really romantic about Regina. That was like the first thought in my head, is I really want to do something romantic, and was thinking about, you know, like a summer love story and something like An Affair to Remember, you know, like when they meet in the Eiffel Tower. But then I thought the monument would be good in Victoria Park, because it is so central. And And then I guess the irony of that just became obviously what happens when two people meet at a war monument. Like what can it even end up being? So that's where it kind of came from.
Great. Well, let's move into talking a little bit about what happened after making this film. So as I said, I've never lived in Saskatchewan when the tax credit was still in place. So I've only heard the rumors, but shortly after this film was finished in 2012, the Sask party decided to cut the tax credit that took all the industry away, and the landscape of filmmaking really changed. And I know that this probably also impacted in every one of you, but in different ways. And some of you have moved away from the province since, some of you stayed. I would like to hear first from the ones who moved. What kind of impact did this decision have on your career, and what was the transition like to your new location? We can go with Jackie first.
Boy, how much time do you have?
I'll start showing you signals when it's too much.
That was really tough. I mean, because I never really planned to leave Saskatchewan. I was having a pretty good life there, and my career was doing well, and had lots of friends and colleagues and community and family, and I really loved the province. And so yeah, it was just kind of weird because I think there was this whole time of people didn't know what to think, right? And what was the next step would be. And then people started to disperse, and then it was kind of stressing people out about, should I be going, and where should I go, and where do you got to pick somewhere, where do you go? And at the time, I think there was a lot of negativity at the end of all that, and some kind of like fighting a little bit about who has the right to still be standing and stuff like that. And I think at the end of it, I kind of almost thought I was going to get out of it, because it was quite dark at that time. That's how my experience was. So we just picked somewhere that had similar things of what we were leaving behind, and somewhere where we could afford, that still has potential for me to work in the industry, which would be Vancouver. So yeah, it was a big deal, and it was a big deal financially. It took a long time to land on the feet and kind of find other work. And I would still say that I'm not working as much as I worked when I was working in Saskatchewan.
Mm-hmm. It's hard to understand the magnitude of the change afterwards. So I can only imagine how big of a change and how suddenly it happened, and these decisions had to be made then for yourself afterwards. And there was, I guess, Mauricio, you have moved as well. Was that also kind of because of the development of the industry here in Saskatchewan, or was your
No, a little bit. It was attached definitely to the tax credit. My story is a little bit different because I was waiting for my residentship card forever, and to be able to work in the industry and stuff like that. The industry was growing, and it was great. And then I received my residentship card, and I think like 6 months later they canceled the tax credits, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, now what do I do? Right? I had the passion to make videos and want to make films, wanted to work in the industry, get new experiences that I didn't get. So it was the seed was planted. It's time to start thinking about moving. Did a lot of work with a production company called Studio 10 in Saskatchewan. There was corporate work, but the seed was planted right there's like the industry just it shrunk so much that there was no room for me. So it's like, well, if I want to expand my wings, if I want to do something bigger, I have to unfortunately leave Regina. And that's one of the kind of that's part of the decision to come to Toronto. It's just like the tax credits. end the industry, and unfortunately we had to go if we want to proceed my dream of trying to make videos and make these as a living, as a career forever, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And how much of that connection still stayed with you? Do you still have professional connections to Saskatchewan today, or did that kind of vanish with that transition?
No, I still they still talk to the boys at Studio 10. They did something in Peru, and I went there they shot a commercial for the co-op in Peru. So I went there as one of the field producers and a translator as well, because I speak Spanish. And I did a lot of that when I was in Toronto, like traveling around and shooting short form kind of running gun style documentaries. When Lowell came to Toronto, we hung out a little bit, a couple of times.
Mauricio gave me work as soon as I got to Toronto.
Yeah, that's true.
So this is how it works.
No, we still keep in touch with lots of friends. Like Toronto is such a hub that people stop by even for 6 hours. They send you a text message. Hey, I'm at the airport. You want to come and say hello? Sometimes we can, sometimes we cannot. So it's good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Jackie, I just heard that you were editing Candy Fox's newest documentary. Is that right?
I did her NSI short last year. Yeah, so I feel lucky that I still have friends and colleagues in Saskatchewan that I can still work with. That was great working with Candy. I've got friends or colleagues at Java Post that I'm doing a little bit of work with them right now. And then, friends that have dispersed elsewhere, Toronto and Vancouver, I'm still connected with and have worked with them on other projects outside of Saskatchewan. So I had a question, because independent filmmaking is funded so differently. Did the nixing of the tax credit help? It's a weird question, but with the funding, it went to Creative Sask. So did that bolster financing for independent filmmaking, or made it worse? Or I don't know this. Diane, Mark?
Yeah, maybe. I'll go ahead.
Well, I know from my experience, Creative Sask took over from Sask Film.
Right.
But Sask Film was actually better for independent filmmakers because you could access money from Sask Film and from the Saskatchewan Arts Board simultaneously. So a feature I did in 2007, River, had money from the Arts Board and from Sask Film. But the way Creative Saskatchewan is set up, you can't access money from both the Sask Arts Board and Creative Sask. So the budget of the film I'm doing right now is half of what I had to make River. And another big thing that disappeared was SCN. SCN was the broadcaster behind I Heart Regina. And as the film was in post-production, the Saskatchewan government announced without any kind of preamble, we're going to close SCN within a week. And SCN, for a lot of the independent community, I think was a real foundation of our ability to make films, because they would pre-license your project, and often that enticed a national broadcaster and funds like the Canadian Media Fund to also invest in your project. So I made a dramatic feature and a couple of broadcast documentaries because SCN existed in Saskatchewan. And we put enough pressure and raised enough of a stink about them closing SCN that they sold it eventually at a bargain basement price to Rogers. And so it's now City TV Saskatchewan. And it's still an important hub for documentary and children's programming in the province. Lowell's brother, Adrian, who did the opening sequence for I Heart Regina and also shot Funda's film, he's done a few seasons of an animated children's series for City. And I know Robin's done a documentary series for City. But City's mandate is narrower than SCN. They don't do dramatic productions. So at least from my experience, independent filmmaking is actually harder in Saskatchewan, even though I never used the tax credit. SCN and Sask Film were really vital to me.
Isn't that something I haven't heard words SCN and Sask Film for so long, I feel like an idiot almost. But SCN was a huge deal. And like, I think everything that I worked on there SCN was involved. Yeah, it was crazy that and they just nixed it overnight. It was, fucked up.
Yeah, lots of change. I would also like to hear about the changes that the filmmakers who decided to stay have went through. I'm sure there's some things you might want to share as well. Diane, we could start with you. You've been making and continuing making independent work since. So what kind of changes have you experienced?
I find I put a lot more of my own money into my films because they're all so personal that I always feel I have to make these films. And so I apply for arts grants now. And the competition is a lot higher in the province with, literally it's the Saskatchewan Film Pool and the Sask Arts Board. And a lot of times I get rejected. For example, I made a feature film called Rigor, and I applied to the Arts Board for post-production money, and I didn't get it. Well, I had to finish the film, so you put my wages into finishing the film. So yeah, I think if you're staying in the province, you have to be extremely passionate about making films and really want to make them. And you can keep applying for grants. You can apply more than once. I have applied to the Canada Council, so the national level is, they have been very good to me over the years. But yeah, it's definitely different. And I actually, before we started this, I actually had to sit down and think about how many films I've made in the last 10 years. And I figured out that I've made 15 films and 1 feature. So I think you have to want it. It's not just about looking for that money. And, with example with Creative Sask, you have to have a marketing angle to your project when you apply. Even with, travel grants, if I wanted to go to a film festival, I have to talk about how I'm going to market my film. And for me, I've always been about just getting screenings. I'm not about the marketing, which I maybe should be. Someone wants to market for me, go ahead.
Take notes. What about Lowell? You've created 4 feature films in the past decade. How in the heck was that possible?
It was weird, honestly. It took a lot out of me, I'll say that. But yeah, I feel like I was just starting my career, the career I wanted when the tax credit happened. In 2011, I did my first feature film, and it was to date still the biggest film I did. It was a zombie film with Mind's Eye called 13 Eerie. And I felt like that was hopefully going to be the beginning of something. But then when the tax credit happened right after, I was doing a true crime reenactment series on the day they announced it. And I remember all the senior crew members were immediately looking into listing their house and move. And I was naive and young, and I thought, how bad can it be? And pretty immediately, the industry was gone. I wouldn't say overnight, but it felt like within a year, half of my friends had left the province, legitimately. So I wasn't ready to leave yet, and I still wanted to make films. So I kind of feel like I was one of the maybe test subjects almost for the new Creative Sask program. And I will say at a certain budget level, if you're making a marketable film like Wolf Cop, like $1 million film, the Creative Sask program is actually very good. They had marketing money then, which I don't know if they really have that as much now, but I feel like for a film at the $1 million budget level, we were well supported. However, the ceiling was very low. So when we came time to do a sequel, another Wolf Cop, we couldn't finance it within the province. It just became, you have to, and no one can really live on a career of $1 million films, especially when you put multiple years into getting them made. So we actually had to partner and shoot half of that film in Ontario just to get it done. And that was kind of the beginning of, I guess for me, realizing the ceiling of what could be done in Saskatchewan. And that's when I started getting I think maybe more and more bitter and thinking, well, if this is the limit of what is possible here, that's not the limit of at least my personal ambition of the kind of projects I want to make. I want to be in an industry where there's upward growth. So I started exploring Toronto. And well, first off, I'm like a rep for the Directors Guild. I'm the chair of Saskatchewan. So one great thing about that is I got to go all over Canada and meet with everyone else and see how great it's doing in every other province except Saskatchewan, even like you know, in the Maritimes. So it really informed a lot of how I looked at the situation and the realization of what would change and could change, and where to probably land. So that's why recently I went east via Mauricio, and I've been there for a little bit, but COVID happened. So I'm now, right now at least, back in Saskatchewan, because it's the same place I'd go in a zombie attack.
You've learned from your films. Perfect. Robin, you've continued working here in Saskatchewan. You've worked with the local broadcasters still quite recently. How has that experience been like?
Yeah, it's the big difference I think between City TV and SCN was SCN had really flexible windows. They could do a half-hour documentary, a 1-hour documentary, different genres. It could be an arts documentary or a political documentary, and they could do drama. But yeah, with City TV, they're, other than children's programming, their focus is really narrowly on reality TV half-hour series, and they really won't consider much outside that. So you sort of have to shoehorn your idea into that format if you want to work with them. And so yeah, recently I did an arts series with them, 6 half hours, called Making It in Saskatchewan. And it's a look at artists across all the different disciplines of the arts, 2 artists in each half-hour episode. And but that was an exception for them. I think, you know, the programmers in Regina were surprised that the Toronto overlords actually agreed to the project, because it's not really, they really don't do arts documentaries, and we didn't get renewed for season 2. So so there's that. The other thing I was going to say about the change in the industry with the loss of the tax credit and SCN and so on, it's the double whammy effect is that with people leaving, suddenly if you do want to make a project, independent project or something quasi-commercial, the collaborators are gone, like the cinematographer and the actors and the writers and all the keys are not here. And Creative Saskatchewan's commitment, like the tax credit, is based on your Saskatchewan spend. So it really becomes an uphill battle to try to do something as an independent in Saskatchewan now, since the changes. And that's kind of sort of gotten worse year over year as more and more people leave. It just makes it even harder.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thanks for bringing it up. Even me watching the film a couple of days ago, I Heart Regina, you can see that there's a lot of talent coming together, and even the acting talent is quite phenomenal. So that is a really good point about that it's not only the creators, the filmmakers, it's kind of everyone involved in the industry. I think Wanda, you have a specific experience as well, shifting from one role to another because of the changes that the industry has gone through. Would you elaborate that a little bit?
Yeah, so at the time that the tax credit, well, I mean, I basically worked in the film industry. I'm sorry about the wind. I've been pushed into the backyard because there's some wiring being done in the house. But I had worked in the film industry for about 15 years and went from that to basically not having any way to make an income as an editor. I wouldn't say overnight, but close to it. And the last few jobs that I did were in fact in Toronto. So I had to make a decision. Do I, you know, my personal life, my family, I had rooted in Saskatchewan, or I had, anyway, that's where my life was. And I had a choice of, you know, leaving that to commute and go back and forth between Toronto and Regina, or just getting out of film. And I decided to get out of film because it was just too hard. And so it's hard not to feel bitter about that, because this was an industry that brought a lot of money into the province. It was an industry that had a lot of spin-off spending, and there were people who wanted to stay and sort of sustain an industry that was part of what could have been considered part of a diversified economy. And so it's frustrating that was basically decimated, that was completely torpedoed by the powers that be. Having said that, one has to move on. And so I basically retooled myself and started working elsewhere in nonprofit communications. So my relationship with film is now, the projects that I work on are independent and more sort of arts-based, which is good in a lot of ways. But yeah, the loss of an industry is, I don't know how to sum it up. I mean, I suppose, yeah, it's beyond frustrating that this happened. And yeah, it seems like there are opportunities, and certainly there have been opportunities for some filmmakers to make projects. There's been a spate of projects that have come along in the last few years by independent directors, which is great. But yeah, the loss of an industry that employed, hundreds of people in a season, yeah, I don't know how you replace that. So yeah.
And Mark, I saw you wave a hand. You have
I just
something to add.
I'll just jump in with some stats that the decade since I Heart Regina was made, 7 of the 14 directors left the province. And in addition to that, just dozens and dozens of crew and cast members who worked on the film. There was over 200 people who worked on I Heart Regina, and dozens of them left the province. I know, like in Eric Hill's I Heart Regina film, the band Rah Rah is performing, and several members of Rah Rah actually made a significant part of their income working in the film industry. And so when the film industry got killed here, it didn't just affect directors and writers and producers and editors, it also affected lots of other people who had another kind of side gig. Their main gig might have been being a musician or being a painter, but they also worked in the film industry, and the film industry had lots of work for many years. So yeah, the fallout of what's happened in the last decade is really sobering. And I was looking at some stats. In the last 10 years, Manitoba's production volume has tripled. BC and Ontario, which were already huge, have almost doubled. And Saskatchewan's was cut in half. And, that's a political decision that has just led to a loss of money coming into the province and dozens of very trained and skilled people leaving the province. This sounds like a big mistake to me.
And did you, Jackie, want to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to, what was I going to say? Yeah, like Mark, it's really quite shocking when the way you put it, like, does that information, has that ever registered with the general public, the magnitude of what occurred? I feel like when I was there, it feels like it didn't, or it was hard to, it's a whole political question I'm asking as well, but I'm sorry, I'm talking in circles. It's really fascinating to talk with you guys about all this stuff. I had seen some thing on Facebook about the idea of a tax credit returning. Is there an appetite for that, do you feel, or is that just wishful thinking?
Mark, you wanna, or Vanda, you had also something to add. Do you wanna answer that, or?
Well, I guess, yeah, I don't know. Again, the point that Robin had made, that there are so many fewer people left in the province who would stand up for the industry now. Now that they're all gone, it's kind of like, well, they're not all gone, but a great many of them are. And there's certainly some very strong advocates and strong voices who stand up for the industry. I'm thinking of somebody like Leighton Burton, who's great at writing op-eds, and he's really on it. And he does not let people forget that this was a viable industry. It was a small industry relative to things like potash and oil and gas, yes, but it was still an industry, and there was no reason to cut it. It was just spiteful. I mean, I don't know how any other way to describe it, but spiteful. But yeah, I mean, whether there's it's hard to say. I mean, certainly, I mean, at the time, I remember there was the Saskatchewan Chamber of Commerce had opined that that they thought that it was worth keeping, that this was an industry that was worth keeping, and why would you torpedo something that actually brings money into a province? But in terms of an appetite, yeah, it's hard to know. It's hard to know where things are, and certainly politically, I don't think it's hurt them. I don't think it's hurt. I don't think it's hurt the Sask Party that they killed the industry. That's not really something that their constituents seem terribly concerned about. So, and it does seem, anyway, I don't want to digress too much, but it does seem that it did fall along political lines, even though it had nothing to do with politics. It seemed like the people who seemed to have the most trouble with this decision to cut SEN, cut the tax credit, get rid of Sask Film, that there is sort of a line between the people who were bothered by it and the people who weren't, and it's frustrating.
We have to wrap up soon, but Robin, you had something to add to that as well.
Yeah, only that a couple of things. I guess that Creative Saskatchewan, hopes and prays and campaigns for an incremental increase every year, and they never get it. So that would be like the baby steps the government could take. But I'm even more of a doomsayer than that. I mentioned this to Mark, that I have a sense that there's a growing attitude in Saskatchewan that stories come from elsewhere, and among the general population, right? That stories come from elsewhere, that history worth preserving doesn't happen here, and even that ideas don't come from here. And that kind of attitude doesn't take root if you're seeing Saskatchewan stories in films and on television and in documentaries on a regular basis. And this sounds a bit doomsaying, but honestly, the publishing houses are shutting down. And I look around, and when I talk to people about the tax credit, it's like, well, why? Why have an industry? We get our stories from Hollywood and Toronto. So and I guess maybe I'm living in a more conservative neighborhood than I used to. I live in Lakeview instead of the Cathedral area, and around me, it's like, honestly, it's not a surprise that the conservative government is elected here, because the general population, doesn't necessarily embrace the arts or be very forward-thinking in that regard. This is my opinion at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Wanda, one more addition.
I'll just the other thing. It was such a successful campaign to get rid of the industry, I guess, or you can call it a campaign. Maybe that's too strong a word, but yeah, the idea that there was, it kind of worked in both. The side that was looking to preserve the industry as well was using it as like support for the arts, and it was an industry. It was there was certainly art in it, but it was an industry. It was something that brought money into the province and generated it within the province. So it's the idea that that this was like an attack against the arts. I think almost, well, in some. It was certainly something that you could call the arts, but I think film and television that's produced on that scale is absolutely an industry, and I can't imagine another industry that would have been hit in that same way or targeted in that way. So, curious.
Well, I'm sure, as we know, there's definitely a push among the filmmakers to bring the industry back, and among other people too. So we'll just have to hope for the best, and obviously the change have shifted ways of making film here, and that's obvious from hearing everybody's stories and experiences, and that change echoes through everyone. Before we completely wrap up this super interesting conversation, I would kind of want to hear your thoughts on what if I Heart Regina sequel or a similar film would be created now, 10 years later, a new one. How would that be? Would it even be possible? How would it look like? What would be the challenges or possible advantages in this time?
It would be an Instagram story.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's still a ton of filmmakers in Regina who could create another version of this sort of film. And you know, the 10 years have been terrible for the industry here, but the indie community has done a lot of important work, and we've probably had more, or we have had more independent features in the last decade than we'd had in the previous decade. So there are still filmmakers making films here, and unfortunately those films don't really have the sort of budgets that allow the filmmakers to pay people very well or at all. But I think there's definitely enough filmmakers in town who could make an I Heart Regina, and I think the city has changed enough in the last decade. There's been a lot more immigration into the city in the last 10 years, so I think it's a much more diverse city than it was when we shot I Heart Regina. So I would be really happy to watch a film made by a new generation of Regina filmmakers.
Robin, you had something to add to that?
Only that I think that this first version of I Heart Regina was very strictly non-political. It wasn't a deliberate thing, but none of the films are political at all. I suspect if there was a sequel made, it would be very political, right? Which, because at the time when we were starting the project, we had no idea that this attack on the industry was going to happen. So there was no reason to be political. They were all very just slice of life stories.
Vanda?
I would say that the technology has changed to a point as well, that so many people could just shoot things on their phones and contribute, and actually, yeah, I think just the democratization of the technology would really change things, and also just how much smaller technology has gotten. You can get into different places, and I know my film would look different if it hadn't been shot. My angle was so wide in the car because we were driving around in a car, and we had to sort of make space for a camera in a very sort of awkward position. And I know now, even with GoPros that weren't being used at that time, it would be anyway, technology would definitely change things.
Yeah, well, the change in 10 years has been quite huge, so the film would definitely look very different. Anyone any final comments or questions for the panel?
This was great. It was really great, like seeing you all and talking about all this stuff. I wish it could go on for a little bit longer, and maybe we could get a case of beer or something.
Unofficial panel.
Yeah, that's right. I thought that was maybe what was going on over there.
It's 1 o'clock in Toronto, so I hope okay. I know. But no, I think that my only last thought would be like, it's great to talk to all of you. I think there is a lot of stories to be told. It's still in the province. I still have lots of love for Saskatchewan, for Regina. And if you guys had any on this way or need anything from me this way, please just don't hesitate to contact us and contact me. Okay.
Great. Well, thank you. This has been a great pleasure getting to know you all and your work a little bit better and your thoughts. Yeah, I wish all the best for everyone and for your upcoming moving image adventures. Hopefully we'll see soon in Saskatchewan.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Thank you.
listening.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for taking part.
Thank you.
Nice to see you all.
Yeah.
Bye now, guys.